I know the #1 country you should travel to next. What do you think it is? Take 5 seconds to think about it. Okay, time's up. Did you come up with an answer? If so, good for you. I'm sure you want me to come up with one perfect answer that I can explain to you and everybody else who's watching this video, but that's just not the way it works. There's a lot of YouTubers out there that say 25 best places to travel to in 2024, but I don't think it's a full picture of the whole story. The one-size-fits-all approach that a lot of YouTubers are using just doesn't work. So in this video, I'll share how you can learn to choose where you want to travel to. But if you did come up with a solution to the question I asked earlier and gave you 5 seconds to think about, then honestly, you should probably just go there. But if you weren't able to come up with one that quickly, don't worry. This video is for you. Welcome to Luxalwea, the place to learn how to live and travel better. In this video, I will teach you the famous method, which yes, is still working on its way to become more famous. But if you apply it and use it in the future, it will revolutionize the way you decide where to choose how to travel and give you a customized and tailored plan about which places you should think about going to. Make sure to stick around until the S section though, because this is by far the most popular step of the whole method that I share with people. A lot of people haven't heard about this particular tool before, and they use it every single time they plan a future travel. Alright, let's jump into the first step of the famous method, starting with letter F. When choosing where to travel to, friends and family is by far the most important factor. If you stay with friends or family, it gives you a much more local experience than you could have if you were just traveling on your own, be it backpacking or staying in hotels or just traveling with your family from home. Let's say, for example, that you have family in Peru and you decide to go down there for a week to see them. Being with your family in Peru is going to give you a much more authentic experience than you could ever have any other way when traveling to Peru. Being with a family lets you eat the same foods with them, go through the same cultural routines, and even potentially stay in the house with them. And being in these unique situations that you wouldn't have normally when traveling gives you much more in-depth exposure to the culture. In my most recent trip, I chose the locations I was going to exclusively on if I had friends there or not. And it took me to some pretty unique places and gave me a lot of very different experiences that I would have if I was just traveling around in hostels or hotels. For example, one of the places I went to was Kazakhstan, where one of my former flatmates lived, and I was able to stay in her flat and meet her entire family and go through their daily routine and see what life in Kazakhstan was like. This experience was so in-depth culturally that I had very little other things to compare it with in the past. I made a video explaining why experiences like this are so valuable and probably different than the way most people travel in my video called The Travel Hierarchy, Stop Taking Vacations, which is linked above. Even if you have family in the US that you haven't seen yet, going there and staying with locals gives you experiences you can only have with locals. And locals tend to live cheaper than tourists do too, so you can make your travel even more budget friendly this way. So hopefully with this first step, you've somewhat narrowed down the options you still have available when choosing where to travel to next. You don't necessarily have to go somewhere where you have friends or family, but if you do, it's a great experience that you can have with them, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. The next step of the famous method is letter A. Letter A stands for activities. Think about what you want to do and accomplish on this travel or vacation. There are a bajillion different things you could focus on, and for example, one of the things you could do is an outdoorsy or active type of travel or vacation. Think about skiing or walking along beaches or hiking mountains or other things similar to this. Another type is a wellness type of travel, where you go to spas and mental health and try to clear your mind and deplug and deconnect from the digital world. Another type of travel is focused on history and museums. Think if you've always wanted to go to the British Museum or the Louvre or any other museum like this. This is pretty influential in deciding where you're going to travel to. Another big type of travel popular with people ages around 20 and post-college is focused on nightlife and clubbing. If you're interested in this and want to travel to maybe Eastern Europe, Google cities in Eastern Europe that are popular for nightlife and decide your cities that way as well. And also if you're interested in backpacking, go an area where people frequently travel around through backpacks, for instance, Southeast Asia or Central America or Eastern Europe or even Western Europe. Knowing what you and the people you're traveling with are looking for in your experience will really help narrow down the seemingly infinite options of places you could go to when you're traveling. The next step of the famous method is letter M. M stands for money. What is your travel budget? I will say there's a pretty big spectrum of the budgets that you could have when traveling. Anything from what the traveler community calls a shoestring budget to a super luxurious budget. And chances are you're probably somewhere in the middle. I've had a lot of fun recently with traveling in the shoestring budget category, but this is definitely not the most comfortable way to travel, so it just depends on what you're looking for. One thing to consider though is after you graduate college and officially have a full-time job, many people experience something which is called lifestyle inflation, which is when suddenly you're flooded with more money and you can afford more luxurious vacations. I will say traveling with more money to be more comfortable isn't necessarily the best option, although there are certain times when it's great to travel to avoid different discomforts that you could have while traveling. There's a huge spectrum of expensive cities in the world and cheaper cities, and some cities are way different than others. For instance, Vienna and Bratislava, Slovakia are pretty close to each other, only I think 40 minutes away, but Vienna is at least twice as expensive as Bratislava is. I had a great time in Vienna, Austria, and a great time in Bratislava, Slovakia, but the pricing between the two cities was astronomical. If you stick around until the end of the video, I'll give you a couple of recommendations of places that you can go that I've really enjoyed that are much more economical than some cities that are nearby. The next step in the famous method is O. O stands for on and off season, and this is a matter of personal preference. The pros of traveling during the on season are first, you have ideal weather, which is probably why most people travel there anyway during that time. Second, you have all of the festivals and events that normally take place during off season. Third, you have a vibrant atmosphere because so many people are in this area. There's tons of tourists and tons of locals, and everyone who's supporting the tourists business-wise is going to be there too. And fourth, you have full availability. Everything that's possible to be booked during the stay while you're in this city is going to be available. Maybe you have to book a little bit early because there's going to be more high demand because of all the tourists there, but at least the options are still on the table. The cons during traveling during the on season are higher prices and more tourists. If you're looking for more of a shoestring type of budget travel, then probably going during on season is not going to be the best. You also have higher prices because there's so many people to compete with because all of the tourists normally go during on season. There's also going to be reduced availability because so many people are trying to book the same events. And finally, the experience may be less authentic because there's so many tourists compared to locals in the area during off season. The pros of traveling during the off season are first, you have lower prices. For instance, this past winter, I went to Cappadocia with one of my friends and we booked a tour to go to some of the caves, and it ended up being private even though we booked a public tour, and we only paid, I think, $15 a person. You also have fewer tourists, so if you're not a fan of crowds, traveling during off season may be better for you. You're also more likely to have a more authentic experience because there's going to be fewer tourists and more locals. And finally, you can have increased flexibility and not need to book things as far out into the future because there's going to be less demand for the services and events that are available. The cons of traveling during off-season is that you may first have reduced services because fewer people are looking to book the same activities as you are. Many things may close during this season and some things may just not be open, so you may also have seasonal closures. And finally, you may have weather variability depending on how the off-season weather is, which brings us to our next topic, letter U of the famous method. U stands for up. What is the weather and climate like at the place you're going to? And what do you hope it to be? As you start narrowing down the places you want to go to and the dates you have available to travel, consider the weather. Is it monsoon season in Southeast Asia, and do you want to experience that or not? If it's winter in Europe, it will probably be really cold. If it's summer or winter or fall or spring in Southeast Asia, it's gonna be hot. What do you want to experience, and maybe help customize where you want to travel to based on how the weather is and what you're looking for. If you live in a particularly cold climate and want some heat and warmth, travel somewhere south. Or if you're in the southern hemisphere, travel somewhere north. Maybe weather won't be as big of a concern for you, but no matter where you're gonna travel to, it's likely gonna impact you. Take it into account to see if you should bring a rain jacket or tank tops, or long pants, or thermals, and anything else that may help you enjoy the place in spite of or even with the weather. The final letter of the famous method, and our last step, is the letter S. S stands for safety and health. Yes, I know people say health and safety, but if I were to do health instead of safety, then it would be the FAMA method instead of the famous method. So we're gonna say safety and health. I'm gonna show you a map created by the US State Department that shows you the danger and levels of restrictions in certain countries for types of travel. I've used this a lot in the past and even decided to go to Cuba over Guatemala for my last spring break. I'll also be making a video in the future about how I found a host family on that trip to Cuba and just the general experience of traveling to Cuba as an American, how to do it, and then what I took away from it. So make sure to subscribe to keep up with updates for the channel. To find the interactive map, just Google something like US Travel Advisory Map, which should be a .gov link. Give it a couple seconds to load everything and click Continue. The map is color-coded and the legend is in the top right. Red means do not travel. These places are dangerous. Yellow means exercise increased in caution. These are okay to visit, just make sure to know what the caution is for. Blank means no extra caution is needed. Orange means reconsider travel. These can also be dangerous and make sure to see why they're listed this way. If somewhere is dashed, it means the country is rated its color plus has locations with more severe ratings. I compared Guatemala and Cuba when I traveled last spring break, and if you click on Cuba, it's rated exercised increased caution, yellow. And if you click on Guatemala, it's rated reconsider travel, orange, and has areas with higher risks because it's dashed. Let's see why the country was rated this way. On this page, you can see why the country got its rating. For Guatemala, it's because of crime. There are also places rated do not travel, the highest risk rating. You can also see a country summary and travel recommendations. Now, let's look at Cuba. Cuba was also rated risky due to crime, but at a lower rate than Guatemala. You also don't have to be American to use this. A lot of the people I've shown this to that have been most excited were non-Americans, especially Europeans. And this type of website is, I think, the only one in the whole world where there's an actual map. So if you know of one created by a different government that has a map, please let me know in the comments because I would love to see it and compare. I will say also, take it with a grain of salt. Places like Denmark and Spain are listed as tier 2 countries for things like terrorism and civil unrest. And while those are real things to consider, chances are it's going to be very likely you experience that. And Denmark is, I think, maybe the safest place in the entire world and the safest place I've ever lived without a doubt. Another thing to consider is the Safe Travel Enrollment Program, the STEP program, also run by the US government. If you're not American, I don't think you can register for this service as it's to specifically protect Americans, but check to see if your home country has a similar service. This is the STEP website. Here you can create an account to let the US government know where you'll be and how to reach you. Now, having more or less really narrowed down the option to a couple different countries, I would recommend looking into what vaccinations you need before you travel there. A great place to do this is the CDC website. This is the CDC Traveler's Health website. Type in the country you'll be visiting, Argentina for instance, and it'll give you a list of vaccines and medication recommendations. All up-to-date health info is available here. Another important thing to consider when traveling is travel health insurance. Maybe you don't necessarily need this and have gotten it some other way. For instance, when I was traveling through study abroad, my home university had me purchase travel insurance through them. And then when I lived in Denmark, I naturally had travel insurance just being a Danish resident. But I would consider getting travel insurance if you're traveling to less safe countries or places with poor healthcare. Travel insurances may also offer compensation for flight delays and cancellations, so look into this if you're going to have pretty hectic travel plans. Alright, now I'll share some personal recommendations I have of places I've traveled to in the past and absolutely totally enjoyed, and have been much more affordable than some other places I've traveled to, which I've also enjoyed. It was just a lot more expensive. Thanks so much for watching this video. These are all the steps that I use when considering where to travel to on a trip, and they really help me a lot and I hope can help you too.